Greetings, everyone. We will get started in a few minutes. Thank you for joining us. All right. We will get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight at our Home for All. It's a virtual town hall on affordable housing. Thank you all for taking some time during your busy work week to be in community with us. I understand there are about 182 registered participants for this webinar. So we deeply appreciate you all and thank you for spending the next 1.5 hours with us to discuss the affordable housing crisis in our community. My name is Vince Steele. I work in the office of Supervisor Keith Carson on housing and social services policy. And tonight we have several speakers lined up to talk to us about the history, the present, and the future of affordable housing in the Bay Area. Tonight, our goal is to leave you with a basic overview of the conditions that have created the lack of affordable housing stock that we see today. We'll learn the perspective of industry leaders who have focused on this work for years. We're going to give you an overview of some of the successes and challenges we've seen in the affordable housing space. And most importantly, how you, the community, our constituents can get involved so we can see more success in the future. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. So please write those questions down as the speakers go through their presentations. We will call on you at the end to, if you raise your hand, we'll call on you so you can ask your question out loud. Also, if you don't get an opportunity to ask your question, we want to make sure that we address all the concerns that you have out there as best as we can. So put those questions in the chat and we'll try our best to respond. If we can't respond to you tonight, one of our team members will give you my email address or the office's email address, and we'll try to follow up with you that way. So we have a packed agenda for you tonight. First up, I'm going to have the Supervisor of District 5, Keith Carson, kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vince, and to Jordan and Amy, who kind of spearheaded this series regarding housing and homelessness. This is the second, actually, of a series in the area of housing and homelessness, and as well as the rest of our staff for helping to put together not only this series around housing and homelessness, but the work that our staff does every single day on social justice issues and issues that affect people who need services from county government. I also want to say a big thank you to our presenters tonight, those individuals who've been dedicated to trying to make sure that we maximize the use of housing in Alameda County, throughout the county, and to address the impacts of lack of housing. A big thank you, because I know that's a heavy lift for many of you. I and a number of my colleagues, other supervisors from around the state of California, today, this afternoon, yet again, was involved in meetings around housing and affordability and homelessness in Sacramento. And so this issue is one that we're taking up here in California in a big way, and have been for a number of years, but this is a big challenge. And so I just want to say that everyone is focused and concentrated on access to housing, homelessness in the state of California. The housing crisis is not exclusive to just California. The overall cost of housing has increased exponentially in recent years across the United States, leading to a lack of supply of affordable housing for many Americans. For instance, from the first 3 months of 2021 and 22, rents increased nationally by 18%. The cost of living in the United States is so high nationwide that there's no county in the United States with a minimum wage worker who works minimum wage every single day can afford a 2-bedroom rental home, according to a report from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So again, this is not just a California crisis, this is a national crisis. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, using national data, defines people who earn between $25,000 and $35,000 a year as extremely low income households. And remember, this is nationally, because many of us living in the Bay Area and in California know that $25,000 to $35,000 is extremely, extremely, extremely low. When it comes to the current supply of affordable housing in the United States, and particularly in California, for every 100 extremely low income renters, there are only 23 affordable and available units for those individuals. Using HUD's criteria for extremely low income household, California has approximately 1.3 million low income renters, with a significant lack of supply for affordable housing units. When looking at the Bay Area, the deficit of affordable housing and availability of rental units for the extremely low income household reaches about 120,849 people just right here in the Bay Area alone. The lack of supply for affordable housing leads to disastrous outcomes for low income earners and marginalized people, such as the Black community and others who have been discriminated against for unfair lending practices and unfair wages. These factors tend to lead to low-income earners living in substantial living situations where they're forced to live in hazardous conditions, putting others at higher risk of asthma and upper respiratory diseases due to mold, lead poisoning from older buildings, rodents, and all other contributors, leading to the unhealthy living conditions that too many people are forced to live in right here in the Bay Area and across this country. We know that the high cost of all housing also leads to housing instability, overcrowded housing units, and homelessness. Furthermore, it forces people to relocate more often than not. Those that mean that they have increased levels of stress and mental health conditions such as depression and chronic anxiety. Alameda County understands this crisis and is investing heavily to ensure Alameda County has a healthy supply of affordable housing for the foreseeable future. As an example of this, in 2016, the residents in Alameda County passed a $580 million bond measure called Measure 1A, which today has created 3,990 affordable housing units, with an additional 806 units currently under development and 1,325 rental units in pre-development stages as of 2023 across all of Alameda County. Just within District 5, the county has made significant investments to ensure an increased supply of affordable housing. For instance, through Alameda County's Housing and Community Development Agency, the county has committed $19.8 million in Measure A1 funds to Oakland Berkeley Way housing development alone. Berkeley Way is a part of an initiative mixed house development project that increases a broad range of housing needs right here in Berkeley. The project will develop the housing complexes, including 89 affordable housing units at or below the 60% of the area median income. 53 homes will be designated as apartment unit houses, and 44 beds will serve as either transitional housing beds or shelters for those experiencing homelessness and mental illness. The Berkeley Way housing development will serve as a state-of-the-art climate-conscious development. The projects are designed to comply with all applicable state and local codes, including the California Energy Code, the California Green Building Code, and the City of Berkeley Environmental and Waste Reduction and Diversion Requirement rules and codes. In addition to the Berkeley Way Center, Alameda County has used Measure A1 funds to fund other projects, including just in my district alone, Grayson Street Apartments, which is located in Berkeley, Albany Family Housing, also in Albany, the Jordan Court Housing, which is located in Berkeley, the Aurora Apartments, which are located in Oakland. We're a long way from meeting our housing needs within Alameda County. However, the county has invested millions of dollars in developing additional affordable units for all of our residents. We will continue to work with our partners, such as the cities and housing developers that are affordable housing developers and low-cost housing developers, to continue to serve those in need and the Alameda County residents who lack the supply of affordable housing. As I stated earlier, this is not just a District 5 issue, a county issue, a Bay Area regional issue, or a California issue. It's a national issue, and we are daily working across cities and counties and the state and the federal government to figure out how we can beef up our housing supply and make sure that that housing is low cost, affordable, to address all of the changes and challenges that we have. Again, I want to thank all of you for viewing in on our series. I know that a number of our elected officials, Dan Kalb and others, have been following our series throughout homelessness and housing. And again, I want to thank our staff for the work that you're putting into this series regarding housing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Vince.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Carson. We appreciate that. I'm going to move us right along to Michelle Sterrett. She is our Director of Housing and Community Development for Alameda County, to highlight a little bit more of what you've just raised, Supervisor Carson, around the programs and Measure A1 and some of the goals that we have at Alameda County for addressing affordable housing. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Supervisor Carson. I'm really pleased to be able to get out here and talk a little bit about what we've done here in Berkeley and Oakland, as well as throughout the entire county on Measure A1. Let's see if my PowerPoint works. Please let me know if it's not moving forward. Yep, didn't move forward. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to highlight one of the quotes that Supervisor Carson just stated, which is, There isn't a single county in the entire United States where someone who is working full-time on a minimum wage job can afford fair market rent. What does that actually mean? It means that when you hear people say, well, they just shouldn't live here, like they should move somewhere else if they can't afford to live here, there is nowhere else for them to move. I think it's really important to be able to state that back to folks when you are talking to someone who is anti-housing, because we really don't have enough resources across the United States, and specifically in the Bay Area and Alameda County. And we really do need to house our community. We have a wealth of low-income jobs. We have a wealth of service sector jobs. And it really is our responsibility to house folks where they are working here in the homes and the community that they grew up in. So I think that's a really critical thing to talk about and explain to folks who are not necessarily in support of housing our neighbors. Here's another picture of Berkeley Way. This one was really exciting because it was very innovative. It is both affordable housing as well as a shelter, as well as transitional housing and a resource center for people who are currently homeless. So it provides a lot of different uses. I wanted to focus a little bit about what that shortfall looks like of affordable housing for Alameda County specifically. So we need over 100,000 units of extremely low and very low income units for the population that we have right now. And we are 52,000 units short of that for people at that low income level. So this is a great graphic. It comes from the California Housing Partnership. They produce a one-pager summary on a pretty much annual basis, and they do it by county. So you can always find really good data from them. And it's data that we feel is really on point. Here's another one, cost burden renter households. If you are extremely low income, over 87% of our extremely low income folks are cost burdened, and 71% of them are severely cost burdened. That means they're paying more than 50% of their income in rent. That means they don't have money to pay for the bus to get to work, to buy food, to have an emergency healthcare issue that might come up. It means that they don't have funding to, live their normal day-to-day lives. And that's where folks are extremely at risk of becoming homeless. I want to talk a little bit about what's gone on with rents, because as Supervisor Carson noted, across the United States in just the past couple of years, you saw an 18% rise, but we've seen more than $1,000 a month increase in a two-bedroom apartment. So in 2014, this orange graph here, we had average rents of a two-bedroom apartment, fair market rent, was $1,360 a month. And now we're looking at $2,200 and $2,300 a month in rent. And so what you can see is, while it bounced around a little bit, it was a steady incline over time. And when you think about the cost of a two-bedroom apartment going up over $1,000 over, less than 10 years, incomes did not increase $1,000. And in order to afford that, they should have increased $3,000. And they didn't do that either. So what does that look like for a very low income or an extremely low income household? You can see here the light blue graph. This is what an extremely low income household of three could afford in 2014, about $500. And now here we are in 2022, and they can afford about $700. So maybe their incomes went up a little bit, but certainly nothing in comparison to what the rents did. And you can see the same phenomenon in the low income, which is, approximately 60% of area median income. It did go up some, but their incomes did not keep pace with the cost of housing. And this is why we see such a huge displacement problem. This is why we see such a huge increase in homelessness in the last few years. So what can local government do? We can issue bonds, which is part of what Supervisor Carson just said. And again, in 2016, we passed a $580 million bond. Our tagline is, "We all belong in Alameda County," because we really were focused on trying to house our community with this bond. Alameda County's Housing Department has been loaning money to affordable housing for over 30 years. We've been doing this work for a really long time. Our portfolio is now more than 8,500 units across the county. You can see that we've spent over $740 million. Most of that, 425 million of that, is Measure A1's rental development program. But we also bring to bear many different other types of funding, including federal home, federal CDBG, federal HOPWA, housing opportunities for people with HIV and AIDS, as well as some local funding. We had a trust fund and some boomerang money that Supervisor Carson helped us get in the mid 2000s. So this is really important. What does that look like in D5? We've been able to create almost 1,800 units, and we've spent over $134 million in District 5. And you can see that a big chunk of that is in Oakland, Emeryville. Berkeley's received a large portion of our funding, and you can see the distribution of where those units are located. Other programs that we did to fund with Measure A1, a down payment assistance program. The Board of Supervisors feels very strongly that generational wealth building is critical, and home ownership is one of those critical paths. So what we have decided is to sink $50 million into a down payment assistance program. We're about a third of the way through those funds. We've helped 141 homeowners. We're on our second lottery process, and the third one will be launched probably in 2024. But we will keep everyone apprised of when that next lottery process will be held. What does this look like? $22 million spent, 141 households homeowners have gotten access to a new home. And they're pretty much throughout the whole county. So we've done a pretty good job of getting those funds in every jurisdiction. You can see the vast majority of them are in Oakland and Hayward, some in San Leandro, but Oakland has had, a market where there's room for people to buy housing. So that's been helpful. The other really important program that is also about home ownership is our housing preservation program. And it's really focused on keeping our seniors housed so they can age in place and age well in place. And this is a rehab program that allows them to make much needed repairs so they can stay in their homes. It also includes the ability to build an accessory dwelling unit, which would provide either a source of income to keep them stable or support in the case where there might be a caretaker that's needed. So this is low interest to no interest loans that allow folks to stay stably housed. And this is what that looks like. There's 78 approved loans so far. The applications are a constant basis, so you can apply at any time. It's a white glove program. What that means is once you come into the program, you are assisted at every step of the way, which means that if you need help with the application, you get help with the application. If you need help with figuring out what repairs your home needs, someone will come and inspect for you. They will help you negotiate a construction contract with your general contractor, and they will help oversee that work. So it's a fairly intense and staff-intensive program. The last thing I really wanted to talk about was work that Supervisor Carson really championed, which is our doorway portal. Essentially, when you want to apply for affordable housing, historically, you have to call up every single developer and see which ones of them have an opening. Through some innovative work that we've done along with the city of San Francisco, we've created a one-stop shop, meaning you can go to this one place and you can see where all of the affordable housing units that are taking applications now, where they are. And once you fill out the application, you're able to pre-populate your next attempt to get housing. So 32 projects have listed up through this process. We've had over 58,000 applications that are unique applications, meaning 58,000 users have touched the system and completed an application. and a little over 1,100 units, almost 1,200 units have been filled this way. And it's only been online for a year and a half, so it's a pilot program. This is what that looks like. You can see what a listing would be here. The Skyline Temscal was one of the BMR below market rate units that leased up. Once you complete your common application, as I said, it auto-populates the next time. And then our partners, our nonprofit developers, are able to manage their wait lists in the system. I think it's super important to understand the demographics of the folks who have come through. So over 35% of the applicants are at 20 median income. And when you add the folks that are at 30% or below area median income, we see that 57% of those who have touched the system are extremely low income. So you can see that there is and that's why we have to continue to focus our housing in that direction. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end. And before we move to our next speaker, I just really want to highlight the fact that you and Supervisor Carson raised Measure A1 as being a game changer in our community for affordable housing. Look, elections matter. Measure A1 passed in 2016 with like 73% of the vote. I talked to a lot of constituents and advocates who want to know how they can get involved, what can they do, and we could work to get more ballot measures such as Measure A1 on the ballot so we can get our community to vote for it. So thank you for raising that. I really appreciate it. And we're going to move on to our next guest speaker here to talk to us about the community perspective of all of this. It's the incredible Gloria Bruce. Gloria is the former executive director of the East Bay Housing Organization and the current senior program manager at Crankshaft. Gloria, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Vince. Thank you, Supervisor Carson, for sponsoring this series. And it's great to be here with Director Michelle Sterrett, who's such a huge leader in this, and also with Jonathan, who I've known for a long time in this field. So as Vince mentioned, I am the former executive director of East Bay Housing Organizations, where I was for 12 years, organization near and dear to my heart. And I see some of my EBHO friends, some of my EB homies, former board and staff members on the webinar tonight. So hi, wonderful to see you. And there are many people on this webinar who know way more about the things I'm going to talk about, but we've got a lot of people in the room. So as Vince said, what I want to do is just give a little bit, following up on Supervisor Carson and Michelle, really giving the landscape. How did we get here and what can we do about it? So without any further ado, let me go ahead and bring up my slides. Oh, this is fun. I'm on a brand new computer in my new job. So it's like, oh, how does this work now? Let's see. Oh, it's giving me a minute. Okay, you know what? That's not going to work right this minute. So I'm just going to talk. But I will hopefully be able to email you all of these slides later. And just to let you know who I am now and where I'm coming from. Tonight, I'm really speaking here as an engaged Alameda County resident. I'm also the chair of the Measure A1 Oversight Committee, which I've been on for several years. You've already heard about Measure A1, and I'll talk about it probably a little bit more. And of course, I'm the former executive director of EBHO, but right now, my title is Senior Program Officer for Housing Security, and I work at a place called the Crankstart Foundation. We are a family foundation based in San Francisco, but we do a lot of work in Oakland as well. And my job is to oversee and move resources to organizations and agencies doing great work to get people housed and keep people housed, and also change our systems in housing in San Francisco and Oakland. And so that's what I'm doing tonight. So I want to make sure that the first thing I start with is just letting people know where you can go if you yourself are looking for housing, or if somebody else you know is, because we just heard about how huge the problem is. So I think it's really important for people to know what the resources are. Michelle shared a really important one, the new housing at ac.gov portal. And I also want to make sure everybody knows, I think everyone, I know we have 211 staff on the call this evening, but I do want to make sure that people know about calling 211, and also, let me get this here in the chat. A couple other resources. Sorry, I'm improvising a little bit because I can't get my slides up. So I'm doing some pasting, cutting and pasting.
No problem, no problem.
Also, AC Housing Choices. And also another great resource that I've come across recently, which is a little bit different, but there are many ways to search for all the different resources that are out there. Another one is called onedegree.org, just posting that in the chat as well. And that has a range of different social services and kind of a different way to search. So 211, they're the experts, call them first, but different people may have different ways that they want to enter into some of these resources. And then finally, I would not be doing my job as a former executive director and a member of East Bay Housing Organizations if I didn't tell you to visit EBHO's website, and in particular, a big resource that our communications managers put together, our study room, which not only lists resources for all the organizations that provide housing in Alameda County and beyond, but also really gives a good one-on-one on like, how do we get here? What is affordable housing? So if there's things that you're hearing tonight that you want to drill down on more, you can probably find something on that study room on EBHO's website. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit is like, how did we get here in the first place? How did we get to this situation where things are frankly just so bad? I was going to show a couple of statistics about how our unhoused population has grown and the disproportionate impact in particular on Black and African-American households, and actually increasingly on Latino, Latinx households. But then I decided, even before I realized I couldn't share my slides, then I decided, I'm not going to do that because it's important for everybody to understand, of course, the gravity of the crisis of homelessness. And at the same time, I don't want to be continuing to sit and dwell on the trauma and suffering of people who are unhoused and the disproportionate impact on Black communities. And I don't want to contribute to any narratives about, why certain people are unhoused and why they aren't. At the end of the day, the point is we have a huge shortage of affordable housing. We have people who are suffering because of that. And there are a lot of systemic reasons for that. And that's really what we need to know about homelessness being the ultimate form of displacement, I think is a really important point for us to hold. And where does that come from? So what I always like to say about our housing crisis is that it is a very long time in the making, decades in the making. So while it is certainly true that things like the boom in the tech sector and the higher income workers who came with that and the way those are driving up rents, that is certainly a factor. The pandemic, of course, the factor in making it harder to get people housed, even though there were some great innovations like Project Home Key, which got people inside and in hotels safely and converted hotels into temporary housing. Those things definitely made things more difficult in the last couple of years and in the last decade. But we have to go back actually many decades into history, and we have to look at things like the practice of redlining, which was essentially, if you're not familiar, it was essentially the federal government literally taking maps of cities and drawing literal red lines around neighborhoods like East Oakland, like parts of South Berkeley, and saying, don't lend here. This is not a good place for lending, specifically because people of color lived there. And then directing investment into the green-lined neighborhoods, which tend to be neighborhoods in the hills. And the consequences of that government mandated action are still reverberating today. And if you overlay maps of where are a lot of the affordable housing needs, homelessness needs, environmental justice needs, and you overlay them on historical redlining maps, the similarities are, I was going to say shocking, but actually not shocking. The similarities are very, very noticeable. So there are a lot of government actions going back decades, including who was able to get assistance from the GI Bill or from government mortgage programs, and who was not 75 years ago, 50 years ago. Fortunately, we have programs like the ones Michelle mentioned in Alameda County that are trying to do some redress of that and actually trying to get things like first-time homebuyer loans in the hands of lower income folks and a wide diversity of homeowners. But the truth is that for a very long time, government policy was doing exactly the opposite. And then in addition to what was going on with the public sector historically, there were a lot of private sector decisions that contributed to where we are. The main point in me going over all of this is that none of this was an accident. None of this is natural. None of this is people just deciding to sort themselves into neighborhoods that are economically or racially segregated. This all happened for a reason. It happened because some landlords discriminated against people who looked a certain way, spoke a certain way, had a certain skin color. It happened because in many neighborhoods, including in our very blue Alameda County cities, a number of them had covenants written into the deeds of homes saying who those homes could be sold to and who they could not. Namely, they could not be sold to people of Black, Mexican, Chinese, etc. descent, and explicitly saying that in the deeds. And then in addition to those sort of property interventions, we also had a lot of land use decisions as well. How are we going to decide how we use land and how we build on it? So for example, something that's getting a lot of attention right now, especially in Oakland and Berkeley, is revisiting the idea of single family only zoning. And what that means is, and Berkeley was unfortunately a city that pioneered this a long time ago, a lot of cities figured out that if you set up your land use laws, your zoning laws, and said, oh, the only kind of homes that can be built in this neighborhood are big single family homes with yards around them. If you do that, you sort of automatically exclude people who do not have the funds or the income to live in a nice, single family home with a yard around it. And that automatically leads to more economic and more racial segregation because of the way that race and class are often, but not always linked in our country. And so there's a big push today from a lot of pro-housing groups to say, actually, we need to revisit some of that zoning. I think Jonathan's going to talk a little bit later about one way that we're trying to get more what's called density, more housing per block or more housing per acre in our cities, because it may not seem like it, what you draw on a map has a real impact, but it absolutely, absolutely does. And then finally, another thing I want to point out is just the impact of the aftermath of the foreclosure crisis. A lot of families, especially families of color, having their wealth stripped away from them when their homes went into foreclosure. And a lot of those homes that were recaptured by financial institutions actually being bought up by speculators. And so we have a lot more housing now that is in the hands of corporations and profit-driven entities, rather than in the hands of individual homeowners, individual renters, or community organizations. And there's also a big movement trying to change that and have a lot more community controlled housing. That's a huge lift. So what I'm getting at with all of this is the causes of our housing crisis are multiple, they go deep, and they are absolutely racialized in both what was driving them and in their impact. And so what that means is our solutions, we need a lot of solutions. There's no just one type of housing or one type of intervention that's going to solve this. We need solutions that have racial justice at their core, and it's probably going to take a while, even though we need some immediate action. So one of the frameworks that's being used to motivate the housing world and get us moving forward is what's called the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps basically stands for the 3 big areas we think we need to move to change everything I just talked about. So the first one is production. So production of housing, basically creating more homes, really plain and simple. We need to do things like Measure A1. We just need to build more homes that people can afford. And I say that very notably. I personally believe there is a need for market rate housing in a lot of places. However, only building market rate housing all the time on its own is not going to get us out of our housing crisis, because right now, with the way our housing system is set up, not everybody can afford housing that doesn't have a subsidy. That's simply the way it is currently. And so we need to also be focusing on building affordable housing for those who need it, where it's needed the most. And then in addition to production, we have preservation, which means taking the homes that are currently affordable, that currently exist, making sure that they're habitable, they're high quality, and that they are permanently affordable down the road. So that might mean having a nonprofit organization come and purchase and fix up a home, but keeping the tenants, or keeping the people who live there in place and stabilizing their rents for them, for example. There are a lot of different ways to do preservation strategies. It might mean having policies where when a building is sold, the tenants have first right of refusal to see if they can have an offer and buy that property and become homeowners themselves, before owners of the building themselves, before that goes out to the general public. And that's called an Opportunity to Purchase Act, or TOPA. It's very technical, but just know there's a lot of things that people are working on. And then finally, actually, I shouldn't say finally, because in many ways it's the first and most important, protection. We have to keep people protected and in their homes where they are right now. That means making sure tenants know their rights, tenants know how they can stay protected. Alameda County has had very strong tenant protections, and I know that that is a source of a lot of, I'll just say, conversation right now in the county. In some ways, it's very complicated. In other ways, it's not. People need to stay housed. People need to be able to afford their rent, and people need decent places to live. And I really want to thank Supervisor Carson for being a huge champion of tenant protections throughout his career, and especially recently. So those 3 Ps, protection, preservation, and production, are really, really important. And we absolutely need to be doing all 3 of those to move things forward. Some of the things that community groups, including EBHO, are doing to move those along are, first of all, trying to make sure that we have better plans and policies in place for housing. So that includes housing elements. I see former partner of mine, Bill Smith, in the Q&A asking about, hey, what's going on with the housing element? And that a housing element is basically a city's sort of an action plan for how it's going to allow housing to be built over the next 8 years. Every city and county has a certain number of units that they are supposed to be able to account for, a certain number of homes for different income levels. And they have to say, we've identified land for those homes to be built on. Here are the programs and policies we're going to use to make it possible. Cities themselves are generally not developers, but cities are the ones who control the land, control the zoning, and control the policies. And often, as Michelle said, some of the funding to make that housing possible. And so housing elements are kind of the roadmap to do that. So those of you who are housing wonks, and there are a lot of you on this call, know that there was just a major deadline in January 31st, on January 31st, a lot of jurisdictions getting their housing elements done by then. Oakland's is done now. EBHO's done a huge amount of work on that. I see Megan Nguyen on the call, who is a big expert on this. And now the question is like, okay, if the housing elements aren't done, let's get those done. And once we have them in place, how do we make sure that we're monitoring them and implementing those plans properly? So that's a big place to follow. Another area is continuing to advocate for more resources. You've already heard about Measure A1 several times, and it's really, really important that voters come out and keep saying yes to housing. One of the things I was going to show you is a slide of all of the other revenue measures and related measures that passed in November 2022 in Alameda County. There were actually several housing related measures in Oakland and in Berkeley, as well as one in Emeryville. And I don't think it's so important that you know all the details of those, as mainly to understand that the reason we are able to have amazing places like the Hope Center and thousands of other new homes through Measure A1 is all of you. It's the electorate. It's people coming out and saying yes to housing. Over 73% of Alameda County residents voted yes on Measure A1 in 2016. In 2022 in Oakland, I was the co-chair of the Measure U campaign, which is an $850 million bond for the city of Oakland to cover housing and infrastructure. And we had, again, a huge supermajority of Oakland residents saying yes to that bond. Yes, we are willing to take a small burden on ourselves as property owners to make sure we have more housing for everybody. And that's the kind of work that we need to do together, is we need to keep saying yes to these revenue measures. going forward. So I just really want to emphasize that that is a very direct impact between what you as just a person can do, whether this is your day job or not, and actual homes getting built is saying yes at the ballot box. So what I'll close with is a few other areas for action that I've already alluded to. So again, voting yes for housing, whether that's voting on a local bond. I see Casey Farmer in the Q&A asking about the regional bond. So I'll see if we get to that later. There may be on 2024 ballot a bond across the entire region where we're asked to say yes to housing in a really big way in all of the counties around the Bay. So voting yes for housing. Speaking up when your city or your town or your jurisdiction is looking at new housing policies or plans or implementing them, whether that's the housing element or whether that is a specific plan or a major project. One of the things I want to emphasize is there are many people working on housing issues, those of us on this panel, and many of the people who are on the Zoom tonight, who this is our day job, is to talk about housing, and we're going to sign on to those city council meetings and those supervisor meetings, and we're going to talk about what we know and very technically what should be done. And that's incredibly important. It's also though important, I'm so proud that, that EBHO has a really robust resident organizing program where folks who have both the technical expertise and the lived expertise are showing up with that. And I want to emphasize, you don't actually need the technical expertise to show up and make a difference. We need more voices just showing up and saying, I believe that everyone belongs here. I believe we need to house our neighbors. I support this tenant protection measure. I support this new housing facility for formerly unhoused people. I support putting more money in the budget for housing. It can be as simple as that, and it makes a difference because the opposition voices are loud. And I think just coming out and saying yes to housing, whether you are a technical expert or not, can be incredibly powerful. And we just really need more of that. And so to close, what I would really encourage you all to do is please check out ebho.org for all those resources, also for actions. I'm a proud member, even though I am no longer the leadership of the organization. We have an amazing interim executive director, Deborah Ballinger, and a great staff. But there are also a lot of other groups that are doing this work. You can get involved with My Eden Voice, that's doing work in unincorporated Alameda County. You can get involved with Care for Community, which is working on a range of issues in Oakland. East Oakland Collective, a great group to volunteer with that is directly trying to work with unhoused communities in East Oakland. East Bay for Everyone, which is a pro-housing group based in, and that does a lot of work in Oakland and Berkeley and beyond. And those are just a few. So I really apologize that I could not get my slides working on my fancy new computer. So hopefully, I know that's not the most accessible way, so I do apologize. I didn't have the visual backup, but I hope that at least some of this is good information for all of you. And I really invite you to follow up through Vince if there's more information I can provide. But most importantly, follow up with EBHO because it's a great resource, and then they're there to guide you through all this. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Gloria Bruce. We appreciate you. We can upload the PowerPoint to our county website. As soon as you send that, we will upload it along with this presentation. And thank you for that overview. Thank you for reminding us of how intentional these policy decisions were that have led to the crisis we're in. So we appreciate that. And 3 Ps, production, preservation, and protection. I think someone put them in the chat for us. And I know there's a lot of questions. I see them popping up. So folks, write your questions down. I think we'll have a good amount of time at the end to have more conversation with our guest. All right. So next up, we have Jonathan Byrne. He is an Oakland Planning Commissioner and Head of Development at Oak Impact Group. He'll be talking to us about the factors that have interacted with zoning to create our housing crisis and how the Bay economy since the early 2000s has impacted the overall housing market. Jonathan, thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Vince. I appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. It's great to be a part of this great panel. the issues of going last. You have to follow folks like Gloria who come in and spit a lot of knowledge, and I'm going to try to build on some of that. But thank you for all of that, Gloria. I really appreciate it. You've actually stolen some of my stuff, but I'll try to illustrate some of the things that you were stating, because they are quite relevant. So I'm going to hopefully have my can people see this? Can people see the main screen, or are they seeing a broken up screen?
We're seeing like your view with the multiple slides.
Got you. Okay, let me see if I can. Let me stop the share here. Sorry for the. Let's see, try to do desktop 2. And give me 1 second, y'all. Can you now see the main screen, or you seeing my screen again?
It's good now.
Okay, great. So I have a slightly different background than the folks on the call. You know, as Vince mentioned, I'm the head of development for Oak Impact Group. I've been doing residential real estate development for the past 20 years, although I'm a planner by trade and sit on the Planning Commission of Oakland as well. So I care very deeply about this, always have, and always wanted to kind of find some of the root causes of why we're experiencing what we're doing, why we're experiencing what we're experiencing, particularly as it relates to the Bay Area. What makes the Bay Area kind of unique as it relates to some of the other MSAs in the country, and that means other cities in the country. And so hopefully we can shed some light about why we are in the place we are, and then talk about how we may get out of that. So this is exactly what Gloria was mentioning. I always like to start with this. This shows where housing can be built, where it can't be built, and what can be built and what can't be built. And as you can see, as Gloria mentioned, the vast majority of the Bay Area that is zone residential is zone single family residential, and that was very intentional. And arguably, our most valuable resource, I guess, next to water, which is land in the Bay Area, is very inefficiently used. And that again was that was certainly done by choice. This is a vestige of the 50s and 60s, the post-war era that we're living with today. And no surprise, there were things that obviously were going on in the post-war era that we are still living with today that, you know, probably shouldn't be living with today. But it has drastic implications for housing affordability and what we're seeing in today. In addition to that, after World War II, we actually took a couple steps back in cities that actually did allow more than one unit. We downzoned those cities. So San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, pre-war cities took a step back. And that's very important because they're now existing products that actually can't be built, existing buildings that actually can't be built under the existing rules of those cities. And that actually was another policy that was implemented in the decades following World War II. This is my neighborhood in North Oakland. I just took a quick walk around the neighborhood, and you can see that they were units that were built in the early 1900s that now can't be built under existing zoning, but certainly can fit very comfortably in those single family, those pink neighborhoods. And then perhaps not surprisingly, we stopped allowing housing to get built. We stopped permitting housing over the last few decades. From 1955 to 1989, in the state of California, we were averaging about 200,000 units per year. And then in the last 15 or so years, that's been cut in half to about 90,000 units. And this is the state of California. But as you can see, the Bay Area really mimics that as well. But we are not, you could argue that we weren't building enough housing in general in those prior decades, but certainly now it is much more acute that we are just not simply allowing enough housing to get built. Again, there are a number of reasons behind this, but certainly it really just shows up in the numbers about what we're allowed to build. And so this really kind of shows our pattern of how the Bay Area built out the decades after World War II. As you can see, we started with a lot of single family neighborhoods. And then over the course of the preceding decades, we actually stopped building in a lot of places. And then what we were building was concentrated into very high density buildings. And there's a lot of good reasons behind that. You know, some around transit corridors that were becoming a little more sustainable in what we're building. But the vast majority of what we are developing in the Bay Area are 50-unit structures or very high density buildings shown here. And the reason why I mention this is because all units aren't equal in essence. High density buildings just inherently are a very expensive product type to build. They have elevators, they have sophisticated ventilation systems, mechanical systems. They use concrete, which is an expensive building component. And so I kind of analogize this to building nothing but Tesla Model S's. And so our policy response to building only Tesla Model S's is to ask Tesla to provide some of those cars for less than retail price for those that can't afford them, or we're subsidizing folks to be able to buy Teslas, but they're just inherently inexpensive product types. So the question would be, is why aren't we building a different kind of car or a different kind of product type? And we'll get to that a little bit later. Our national affordable housing delivery system is done through a system called a low-income housing tax credit, and that is typically coupled with local measures like A1. But there are some significant limitations to this model of building housing. Number one, it's just oversubscribed. There's only a certain amount of tax credits that the federal government allows every year. It's a complex system. It takes a long time, and it ultimately becomes very costly on a per unit basis, given a lot of the requirements. And so what happens here is we have a system that certainly on the production side is a very thorny system and is very difficult to produce sufficient amounts of affordable housing. But it is our system, and so I don't want to disparage it. I just am highlighting some of the issues. But one of the things that is of issue is the fact that we are building, again, the most expensive housing product type on both the market rate and the affordable side. So it does limit the amount of dollars, the amount of subsidy, the length of our subsidy dollars on a per unit basis. So as Lori was mentioning, there is a lot of talk around in housing circles around building different housing product types that will diversify our housing stock. Right now, we're building the product types on the edges, the detached single family homes out in the outer suburbs and the exurbs, and then the mid-rise buildings that you're seeing popping up in the core Bay Area. And the question is, can we recreate some of those building product types that were done pre-World War II to gently densify the areas that were shown in pink on that map, and to create opportunities for folks to live in those areas that are unable to do so because of the cost of single family homes that exist in those communities now. And so those building product types are much less expensive to build on a per unit basis. They don't have elevators. They don't have complex mechanical systems. And so I liken these to Toyotas. And so this is all in the concept of being able to diversify your housing product type, having a variety of options for folks to select from at a variety of price points. And that is, one of the things that folks are trying to do by providing what's called housing choice. And that's the kind of the euphemism of breaking up single family home neighborhoods, exclusively single family home neighborhoods. But I want to say that there's some other things. It's not simply just zoning that is causing our crisis. As Gloria mentioned, there are a number of different things that are conspiring to create our reality and color our reality. Because other cities have zoning just like the Bay Area. But the Bay Area has experienced some things that other cities have not, as Gloria was alluding to. Number one, we all know about income inequality. And the fact is, over the decades, our country has become more and more unequal and more of a winner and loser society. And so, as you can see, starting in the 80s, the upper income of earners have started breaking away from the median earner and the lower income earners whose incomes have basically flatlined. And that has created this kind of winner take all society, whereby you have crazy statistics where the 0.001% of Silicon Valley households hold more wealth than the bottom 50%. And that has dramatic impacts for our housing market. In addition, the federal safety net has declined and shrunken and shrunk dramatically, just on the concept of federal outlays, but certainly federal outlays as it relates to housing. As a percentage of GDP, federal spending has gone from 1.4% down to 0.25% of GDP. And the federal government has really started to has gotten out of providing housing to the most vulnerable. And what this does is that it puts more pressure on state and local governments to pick up the slack, and it challenges even their budgets. And so this 40-year kind of retraction of the federal government from providing housing also has tremendous implications about what we're facing today, because it was a huge revenue source that no longer is as active as it once has been. And we should likely need to get it back up to where it needs to where it was historically. But there is this thing called the superstar cities, and Gloria did allude to this. Superstar cities is a term that was coined back in 2006, and this is where the Bay Area has been unique in the last 15 years to 20 years, and its economy has been supercharged because of it. The superstar cities were New York, Austin, Seattle. There are various cities around the country that absorbed a vast number of the information technology jobs that were created, and also the GDP. It fueled the GDP of the country in those areas. And because of how how unequal the economy has been, it's really created some of the things that we are seeing today. But the Bay Area is an outlier as it relates to all these superstar cities. In terms of number of tech jobs we have as a percentage of our overall economy, the Bay Area is way out in front. The Bay Area, in terms of attracting tech talent, is magnitudes above other metros, as you can see. Even New York City, by number and by percentage, the Bay Area is an outlier. It's also an outlier as it comes to attracting dollars. This is VC investment the first half of 2022, venture capital investment for the first half of 2022, but this really mirrors the 5 to 7 years preceding it, and where the Bay Area simply is way out in front of every other metropolitan area. And those dollars that are coming to the Bay Area, they're not sitting in bank accounts. What they are doing is creating jobs. And as you can see on the chart on the right, the Bay Area has been responsible for absorbing 30% of all the information technology jobs, or the growth of those jobs in the last decade. And coupled with our inability to permit housing, we are vastly outstripping the number of housing units to the number of jobs that we are creating. And so one of the statistics that I found just kind of eye-opening was Plan Bay Area 2040, which was a kind of a regional planning document that was produced in 2010, projected 1.3 million jobs are going to be added in the 30 years between 2010 and 2040. We added 1.4 million jobs between 2010 and 2019 alone. So we outstripped the number of units, the number of jobs that we were assuming were going to happen in 30 years in 10. And to put that 1.4 million jobs in a little bit of perspective, there's only 1.5 million single family homes in the Bay Area. And so it just kind of illustrates how many people have been moving to the Bay Area, given the dynamic economy that's kind of going on out here. And these jobs that are being created, no surprise, aren't equal either. And so we all have known about the Bay Area migration and loss of population. That is true. Most people, there are more people are leaving the Bay Area than are coming, but the ones that are coming are high income, and they are dramatically changing the demographics of our cities. As you can see, Silicon Valley and San Francisco, almost 1/3 of the folks that live there now make above $200,000 a year. And so that has tremendous downstream impacts on our housing market. And so just take your hypothetical, household that makes $200,000 a year and spends, 1/3 of their income. What they can do is spend $5,500 a month on rent, which is a tremendous. That's a very large amount. Not to mention if they were to couple up. But what they can't do, which is crazy, is they can't actually afford a mortgage on the median price house in the Bay Area. And so what do? Well, they go to a county that doesn't have that's less than the median price of the Bay Area homes, counties like Alameda. And this is where gentrification starts to happen. Or they remain in the rental market and start distorting the rental market. And as you can see, San Francisco and San Jose occupy the top of this not so great list of high income, a percentage of high income earners that are in the rental market, and they are competing often at the detriment of those that are most vulnerable. And there was a study done on the right in 2018 that talked about what happens when a community's median income exceeds a community's median rent exceeds the community's median income by over 32%. And when that happens, homelessness really starts to become evident. And as you can see in San Jose and San Francisco, we've crossed those thresholds, decades ago. About 2006, we've crossed that 32% threshold. And as we can see with our homelessness crisis, that has kind of tagged along right with it. This is another city, New York City, that has also struggled to permit housing in a sufficient manner. And I just show these two charts because it's just interesting to see how the median income of the area directly correlates to what folks see in terms of homelessness and folks on the street. And as you can see, these are both graphs that look at New York City income and homelessness from 1983 to 2019. And they really, really correlate with one another. And I just find that fascinating to kind of look at. And when you look at Alameda County, as you can see here as well, we don't have, point in time counts are done every 2 years, but starting in kind of 2013, Alameda County's median income started increasing dramatically. And as you can see, our homelessness issues have come along right along with it. So, all this is to say is that there is a confluence of factors that have occurred, and again, there are the issues are systemic, and there are a number of them. And Gloria touched on a lot of them, and I just wanted to touch on some others. But all of these things are playing into what we face today. But really, when it comes to seeing homelessness and what we're experiencing, it is this intersection between a very dynamic, unequal economy and a lack of housing, a inelastic housing market that's not producing enough housing to deal with that. But that said, the solutions to this, as Gloria mentioned, there's no one solution. Production is not going to solve it. It's got to be production, preservation, and protection. Market rate's not going to do it. But affordable housing is not going to do it. It all has to do it because it's all interrelated. When it comes to a dearth of housing, the housing market becomes very, very interrelated. And it needs to be an all of above kind of approach to what we're doing. The silver lining of this, as we've all mentioned, is that these are policy choices. These are choices that have been made throughout the decades, and they've been made by people, and they can be undone by people or changed by people as well. But what it really takes is for people to get involved and engaged on this kind of topic, and really understand kind of what we're up against and what we're dealing with to really make change. I will just leave it at that and turn it back over to Vince. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jonathan, for that very, gosh, comprehensive overview. We really appreciate it. I want to remind folks out there that this recording will be placed on our District 5 website. So check it out. A lot of amazing knowledge has been dropped by our speakers so far tonight. I know I'm going to go on the website and play this back a couple of times. So please do the same thing and take notes. So I'm going to move us on to our lightning question round. So when we sent that invite out to y'all, you wrote us some questions and some things you like to hear from our guest panelists. So we're going to go on to the first question and hear each one of our panelists give their answer to it. A big need between homelessness and affordable housing is transitional supportive housing. How can we provide more transitional supportive housing in the county and state? And why don't we start with you first, Gloria?
Sure, and I feel like Michelle will have a lot to say on this as well. I think this is really important that we have an urgent need for moral reasons, for health and safety reasons, for everything else to get people indoors and get people housed as quickly as possible. And there are a number of different types of interim housing solutions that are out there. There's also something called permanent supportive housing, which is really about getting people. It's a principle which has become really important called housing first, which is even if somebody has something else going on, another barrier going on in their lives, which many, but not all unhoused people do, may have health issues, disability issues, substance use issues, though there are many people who do not have those issues. Housing first means get people a home first, because without that, you really can't address someone's employment barriers or substance use barriers or whatever else it might be. So permanent supportive housing is the one way to do that, which means you get people into an apartment, and that apartment comes with services that people can use. There's a case manager who might work with residents of that building. There are ways that they get connected to services. And so really what we need is more resources for that type of service enriched housing solution. And we also need to find ways to shore up the workforce, the case managers and the people, the social workers and the people who actually provide those services. And so I think, this is going back again to the question of like, what can we do? I think it's really making sure that we are doing budget advocacy and advocacy for the bonds to make a difference. And it does make a difference. A lot of more of my work now is in San Francisco, and San Francisco, interestingly enough, was the only one of the counties in the Bay Area in our last homeless count, the point in time count in 2022, the only one to actually see a decrease in the number of unhoused people in that county. And one theory for why that happened is because there's a lot more supportive housing that has been built in San Francisco in the last couple of years. And it has made a difference. And so I think that's something that we really need to be focusing more on.
Vince, you're on mute.
On mute. Michelle, did you want to jump in? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I want to jump in. I always like to talk about the money. One of the graphs that I showed talked about the difference between what someone at extremely low income rent can afford and what fair market rent is. And it is what's needed is a subsidy. And, Jonathan talked about the disinvestment by the federal government in our housing industry. And essentially what we really need are vouchers. We need project-based or tenant-based vouchers that come from the federal government that help us subsidize the unit. One of the number one reasons why people become homeless is economic reasons. It is not because they have a mental health issue. It is not because they are drug addicted. It's because they've been hard hit financially. And if you're hard hit financially, what you need are resources. So during the CARES Act, during COVID, and with some of the funding that came from the federal government, like the CARES Act, we received some emergency vouchers from HUD. Yay, we got emergency vouchers. Alameda County, across all of the Bay Area, there's 5 housing authorities in Alameda County. We received 850 emergency vouchers. We have over 12,000 people on the waiting list. So yay, we got 800, but what we really needed was 5,000, 8,000, 10,000. And so it's a significant increase in the amount of operating support to get people who are extremely low income into housing. And that's what I think is like the number one need. Period.
Yes. Thank you, Michelle. And Jonathan, you want to round us out?
Sure, I'll put my developer hat on once again, and I think what I'll mention is one of the very successful things that happened during COVID was Project Room Key, or Project Home Key, or Project Room Key. I think it was Project Room Key at that time. And what that did is it circumvented CEQA. And I think really have to when we talk about housing, and certainly when we talk about housing for the homeless, I've sat in more, council meetings than I can imagine, that really where a homeless project was being sponsored and and fiercely resisted by the community. And oftentimes these things are held up through CEQA. And I really think like CEQA reform and getting and just smoothing the process for allowing housing to get built would really help in this, and getting these kind of projects off the ground quickly. That's what I would say to that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all. It's a good segue to our next question, as we talk about policies that allow housing to be built. Can the builder's remedy be effective in encouraging developers to build affordable housing in cities that don't meet state housing requirements? I want to give a quick background on the builder's remedy. It allows developers to get approval for housing projects of any size in cities that don't have a compliant housing element. So a lot of the speakers earlier today talked about housing elements, and that basically means that the city didn't meet the state's housing requirements. This builder's remedy would allow developers to bypass zoning requirements, so as long as at least 20% of the units in the building are affordable. So the question is, can the builder's remedy be effective in encouraging developers to build affordable housing? And Jonathan, why don't we start with you on that one?
Well, my answer is going to be colored by my last answer. I think that this is going to have limited effectiveness if I'm a betting man, and the reason why I say so is because it's, first of all, it's very untested. This is a pretty novel, and from a market rate standpoint, I'll take that first. The cities that are the cities where you can propose a builder's remedy project are cities that almost by definition are kind of, I don't want to call them all bad actor cities, but there's certainly cities that aren't really wanting to, or aren't making efforts to see housing being produced, or else they would have their housing element at least in with and certified by HCD. And so from a developer standpoint, the builder's remedy, we still don't know where CEQA falls within it. And what we understand is that CEQA still does apply. And so if CEQA still applies, then cities still have the ability to slow or even basically neutralize a project just on CEQA grounds. And so from a market rate standpoint, I don't really see it there. On the affordable standpoint, I think it's going to be challenging because you still need matching funds. And oftentimes those matching funds come from the cities themselves, or at least a portion of them. And so I don't necessarily see affordable housing developers, who rely on these cities to give them funds, being able to put forth projects as well. But that's just, my initial thought. I think this is going to be a very interesting, thing as it goes forward.
And of course, we just saw CEQA being used that way with the UC Berkeley situation just a few weeks ago.
Exactly.
So, yep. All right. Michelle, did you want to jump in here on your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan. This is an untested remedy, but I think it's also going to be a small moment in time, right? All of the cities are rushing to try and get housing elements approved, and I, even if it lasts a year, it's not something that's likely going to have a bigger impact. But it will be wonderful to see if it does, and what that means. I think fixing CEQA is probably a more impactful change that could happen. And I just want to point out that, Eden Housing has been in a protracted CEQA lawsuit for the downtown Livermore project that had 40% homeless units in it. And, it was zoned for housing for over 15 years and it was purchased with housing money. So, that just tells you how difficult it is to build.
Yeah.
Vince, I'll just jump in really quickly on this
please.
one, because I think Michelle and Jonathan covered it very well. And there are people on this webinar who are like, yeah, I know all about the builder's remedy and CEQA. And then there are also like probably other normal people on this call who are like, what the heck are those things? So that's why I posted this in the link. This is pretty wonky stuff. But the main reason why I think this is important, I agree with the assessment of my colleagues who just spoke, but the main reason I think this is important is to show that there are actually consequences now for cities not getting their housing elements done or not having compliant housing elements, like consequences with teeth. And that I think is actually pretty different. So regardless of whether like builder's remedy projects actually get built, I think having a forcing mechanism to get some of these cities that are not the best actors to be like, oh, we actually have to follow the law. And there could be a lawsuit or there could be a project. That's a different development. I think we'll have to see where that goes.
That's the takeaway, right? We want to make sure that we are putting things out there that are forcing our cities to comply. Thank you for that, Gloria. Final question in our lightning round. The housing affordability crisis is the result of poor policy choices and lack of investment. What type of policies and programs should we create that addresses scarcity and affordable housing? Why don't we start with you, Michelle?
I gotta say, I want a copy of Jonathan's presentation because I loved it. And I think he hit the nail on the head with something I felt most of my life. I grew up in downtown Sacramento and downtown and North Oakland. And we've always had a wealth of housing choices in a small area. You could have a single family home, you could have a 12-plex, you could have a duplex or a 4-plex. And essentially they all had the same sort of impact on the neighborhood and the same sort of scope and scale, but you had various types. And I think that is probably one of the most important things that we can do. And I'm a huge supporter of accessory dwelling units, which are getting an additional unit onto one of those single family home lots. And in light of that, the county has moved forward with building a ADU resource center. We've just launched sort of the draft landing page, but we'll have an idea book up. We're going to have a housing calculator. All of the things that other counties have already done, but we've been working on getting ours launched as well. So, a huge supporter of getting more units on those single family home parcels.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, this is, we certainly have made a lot of poor policy choices. I do want to give the state of California and certainly the Bay Area locally a lot of credit in that, I'm not going to say it's enough investment, but we've made long strides in our investment here. I think it was almost $12 billion last budget that was dedicated towards affordable housing and homelessness. It needs to be more. I'm not saying that, but I do want to just make sure that people really understand the type of investment that we're doing. And I think what I also say is a lot of this stuff is working. I mean, the issue is that we really can't close the front door, and as we can't keep people falling into the system of vulnerability. I mean, that's that I think is really key. But I think I read, and I may get this number wrong, but there was a study done about, homeless services last year, and I think it was something like 571,000 people were served statewide. And so that really needs to be celebrated, I believe. But big picture, I think that what we need to really understand is that it's all interconnected. And I think that we really need to speak out on the fact that housing is scarce. I think everybody believes that housing is scarce. The real question, and I think where the rubs come, is, well, what fills that scarcity and how is that scarcity filled? And I think we need to be encouraging the allowance of housing to be built in all areas of the spectrum. And I think and that's been really tough. I mean, the production side of the 3 Ps has been arguably the toughest because it really starts impacting folks. But I think housing diversity, to Michelle's point, is certainly something that I've been really a big supporter of. But Certain things like social housing, acquiring land, governments acquiring land and holding it, in the public trust. These are the type of things I think that need to have the all of the above approach that really need to explore. But it's a broadly trying to expand the housing options for all households.
More Toyota Camrys, right?
Exactly. Right.
Okay, Gloria, you want to finish us out?
Sure. I mean, this question 3, Vince, is a little unfair because I think you were asking all of us, like, tell us about your entire career and what, what you've been doing for decades on this. I'll just echo a bit of what Michelle and Jonathan said. And I think one of the reasons why, as much as I miss my role at EBHO, why I'm excited to be in a role where I get to work on a range of housing strategies at the Bay Area level, is because I'm a big believer in we need it all. I do not think we have the luxury of getting stuck on our particular type of favorite housing intervention. That doesn't mean we shouldn't all work on our things. That makes sense, right? But I'm like, tenant protections, yes. Community land trusts, yes. Social housing, of course. Low-income tax credit housing, yes. Housing vouchers, yes. Like, you get the point. Like, we need all hands on deck. We need all the strategies. Tiny homes for formerly homeless youth, absolutely. So, I'm about, like, let's get out of our boxes about what we think is the perfect model, and let's see what is serving people equitably and effectively, and getting people housed, and redressing the racial and economic injustices that we've seen. And if it's doing that, then the answer is yes. And I want to just allude really quickly to one of the questions that I saw in the Q&A, which unfortunately was from someone anonymous, saying, well, why are property owners seen as the bad actors here who always have to invest? I want to reframe that. I really don't think this is about certain people being seen as bad actors. I'm very fortunate to be a homeowner myself. It's not about some people being bad and some people being good. It's about the fact that we have a society of great abundance in which some people have nothing. And if I'm someone who has a little more, I think it's actually my social responsibility and my moral duty to share that with someone who has less. Not because I'm a bad actor, but because I'm a human who believes in community. And so I think, my takeaway would just be like, let's just try to think about, it's not about some of us are good or some of us are bad. It's not about those of us have more or, somehow need to be ashamed of that or being shamed for that. It's about this needs all of us, and we all need to be in and contributing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What a way to drop the mic. Okay. I think we have time for one question. Unfortunately, folks, sorry, we're nearing 7 o'clock. And I'm going to ask a team member to, if you raise your hand out there, someone will select you and you can ask your question out loud to our guest.
So we've got Diane Lewis.
All right. Diane Lewis, we see you.
Hi there.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I was just curious as to the status. I know the moratorium is lifted and there are evictions starting. The resources available for those folks who have not paid rent and or being evicted, are they just forced literally to leave the county? Are there resources within the county for support?
Michelle.
Want me to take that, Vince?
Yeah, please.
The eviction moratorium is not over yet. The public health emergency was ended on Tuesday. The eviction moratorium says that the moratorium will be over 60 days after that. So we are expecting that to be over on April 30th or 29th. But definitely in time for a May 1st rent payment being due. During the eviction moratorium, you cannot be evicted for any rent that is outstanding when May 1st rolls around. However, you can be sued by your landlord and they can take you to small claims court, and those resources need to be brought up, and at some point you'll have to pay your back owed rent. The resources that have been available came through COVID funding that the federal government provided, and most of those resources have been deployed. We essentially saw approximately 15 months worth of funding that the county's program covered, which covered all of the cities except for Oakland and Fremont. Oakland ran a program, Fremont ran a program, and those resources, were scarce. Frankly, there wasn't quite enough money to go around. I think what we saw is that the feds distribute the money on a per capita basis and not based on a need. And so some states out there had plenty of money and didn't even need to spend it all. And then there were states like California that were desperately in need. And I know that our governor signed on in a joint letter with the governors of New York and several others, basically saying you need to redo this allocation methodology because we didn't get enough. So as far as what resources are available, the county has the AC Housing Secure program. It has a little bit of funding left. Unfortunately, the board didn't pass the contract for Central Gulf's legal assistance on Tuesday. We'll be attempting to bring that back and see if we can't get the board to vote yes on legal assistance for tenants who are facing eviction. It has been a very important program for the last 5 years, and the fact that it's not in place right now is of great concern. I think we need to dive in a little bit and figure out what's going on there, but we definitely want that program to move forward. There are some service dollars that are still available under ERAP, and essentially those funds are to help people come up with a housing stability plan. And that is also an AC Housing Secure program, and AC Housing Secure is a website where you can go and you can learn about tenant rights. You can learn who to call if you need help with an eviction notice and what to do next. And there is no more emergency rental assistance. So that's where we're at.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, all of our guests. We are a little bit past 7 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap us up. Again, if folks have questions that didn't get answered, please put those in the chat and we will try our best to follow up with you. We want all of your concerns to be addressed as much as possible. So this is the second town hall of a 3-part series, so be on the lookout for an invite for a final housing and homelessness forum coming to you soon. Also, please reach out to the District 5 office to let us know what you like to see in a final town hall. We have some ideas, but of course we want everything to be shaped by you, our constituents, our community. So please let us know, be in contact with us. And thank you all so much for joining. We appreciate you sharing this virtual space with us tonight. And you all have a very safe and blessed night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.